Well, I'm delighted to be here. And I want to say thank you, as everyone else is, to Allie Peel for all the wonderful arrangements. I was so happy to get the invitation because I hadn't known Sarah Greenough personally, but I've been a longtime fan of her work. And I really enjoyed getting to know the great team, curatorial team in photography yesterday. So I was asked to speak on Dorothea Lange in honor of this wonderful new gift of photographs from Daniel Greenberg and Susan Steinhauser, over 140 photographs by Dorothea Lange that span her career. And I wondered how to do justice to this in such a brief period of time. So I said, well, can you send me like the PDF with thumbnails of the images so I could see what's covered here? And as soon as I saw those images, I knew exactly what I was going to talk about. Because when I looked at many of them, I saw the ghost of the image that Lange had paired with it. Because many of the photographs in the collection were published in Lange's book, American Exodus, and in her book, American Countrywoman. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Dorothea Lange lived from 1895 to 1964. She's probably best known for the photographs she took during the Great Depression when she worked for the Resettlement Administration and then for the Farm Security Administration. Here you see her in the 30s with her camera and her car. She often got up on top of the car to take photographs of the landscape. So who is Dorothea Lange? I wrote a book about Lange, and I discovered as people asked me what book I was writing, and I was writing about Dorothea Lange, that many people didn't know who she was. And I said, but you do know who she was, because I'll bet you recognize this photograph. This was a photograph that she took during the 1930s, and it was chosen by the U.S. Postal Service as a commemorative stamp to represent the decade of the 1930s. This is a photograph she originally took in 1936, and here was her original caption: "Destitute pea pickers in California, a 30-year-old mother of 7 children, February 1936." This is the caption that you probably know this photograph by: Migrant Mother. I want you to just think for a minute how those two captions influence the way you read this photograph. Here you're led to think about the specific conditions of specific people in a particular place. Here, you're led to think much more. This is a woman who stands metaphorically for many, many mothers. So part of what I want to talk about today is Lange's care with words. I'm not sure that she was the one who gave this title, Migrant Mother, by the way. And she was very frustrated by the amount of attention that this particular photograph got, because she felt that there were so many other photographs of hers that deserved just as much attention. She said at one point, "There's hardly anything I've done that couldn't be enhanced and fortified by the right kind of comment." Here's another caption of hers from 1939. "Member of congregation of Wheeley's Church, called Queen. She wears the native old-fashioned type of sunbonnet. Her dress and apron were made at home. See 1991 9C for side view of bonnet and homemade gloves. Contrast with Texas type sunbonnet. Refer to caption, general caption number 23. So she said, a caption should enhance and fortify a photograph. It should not be text that tells a person what to look for or that explains the photograph. It should give you a different look. So as we go through these photographs for the next few minutes and take a look at the captions. Be thinking about how the words might give you a different look of the photograph. This is Queen's Church, annual cleaning up day at Wheely's Church, 1.1 miles southeast of Gordonton, Person County, North Carolina, July 5th, 1939. Group on church steps, note rakes, yard brooms made of dogwood, homemade buckets with dippers, note woman wearing bonnet, front and side view, note homemade gloves. This woman was called Queen. This portrait of Queen is one of the photographs that is part of the gift of Daniel Greenberg and Susan Steinhauser. Now, I first met Queen in 1967 when, as an undergraduate in a bookstore in Harvard Square, I was browsing the photography section and I pulled out this book. Dorothea Lange Looks at the American Countrywoman. I opened it up and there was Queen. She was paired with this photograph of her church that we just saw recently. But in the very back of the book, what really interested me was this typical field documentation, which you see on the right, which is a long description full of vivid details about annual cleaning up day at Wheely's Church in Gordonton, North Carolina. And I read it and I thought, wow, this woman was not only an artist, she was also an ethnographer. And she was a social activist. And this was a point in my life where I was trying to make a decision between the practice of art and the study of art and issues around social action. And I thought, maybe I can have it all. So I followed Lange as the years went by, and every new book that came out on Lange was my hero, I looked for more of this typical field documentation. I found one other instance where someone else published this same text that was in the back of American Countrywoman. And finally, in 1998, I decided to go find them. This is over 30 years later. So I went out to Oakland, where her archives are, and it took me 2 days. And I found that there were over 70 of these, what were called general captions, that she started writing in 1939. And here's the one, here's the original typewritten text that she submitted to the Farm Security Administration in 1939 of her visit to the church. Now, what really excited me, if you look at the very end of this text, you see refer to negative numbers, 19917C, 19819C, etc. And I realized that what she was doing was writing general captions for a grouping of photographs. And at the end of these general captions, she was giving us the link to the negative numbers for her photographs, which are in the Library of Congress. So I was able to go to the Library of Congress and find them. I was also out in the archives in Oakland able to find some of her field notes, which I later realized were the basis for some of her captions, which she often did with her general captions. And here you see general caption number 36 from Columbia Basin near Quincy, Washington, is that she would take clippings out of articles and clippings out of newspapers and clip them to her general caption that she sent back to Washington. She also collected all kinds of things, hop picker, pay envelope, various articles, various advertisements for timber companies trying to lure drought refugees out to the Pacific Northwest to settle timbered out land. And I found also texts that she had taken with her in the field and underlined here in red that she had made notes about what kinds of portraits she wanted to take. So I decided to gather all these together in a book, which is called Daring to Look, Dorothea Lange's Photographs and Reports from the Field. And they take all of those those general captions and then a selection of images for each of the general captions that she wrote in 1939. I called the book Daring to Look because she said at one point, "No country has ever closely scrutinized itself visually. I know what we could make of it if people only thought we could dare look at ourselves." And she did. She and her husband, Paul Taylor, who was an agricultural economist, professor at the University of California, Berkeley, did a lot of field work together in the 1930s. In 1939, they published a book, An American Exodus, a record of human erosion, which is important not just for a record of the time, but as an experiment of photography, the photographic essay as a medium, and in putting together text from various diverse and interesting sources together in this book. In the process of putting together the book and doing the photo essays, they didn't have space in their house in Berkeley, so they rented an apartment around the corner, and they would lay out these pairs of photographs that would be the facing pages of American Exodus, laying out on the floor along the walls all of these pairs of photographs which were then sequenced. Now, I'm going to show you, first of all, singly, the photographs from the new collection that were published in American Exodus. This one. So you see, it's telling the story of people being evicted from land either by being tractored out or by drought and moving west, and then becoming migrant workers, many of them. So Lang said at the end of her life, reflecting back on her work and what she cared about, she said at one point, "If you would really be a consummate worker in photography, you'd work in 3s. And maybe when you get better, you'd work in 4s to fortify. From idea, you would go to statement. From statement, you would move to what in writing is a paragraph. And eventually you might do a book. But that would be a book the camera could do. It wouldn't be just a collection of separate photographs bound together. I haven't gotten anywhere near it, but I do think in 2s. I think she was being too hard on herself. I think she did get somewhere near it with American Exodus. It's been a very influential book. And she said, talking about pairs, the 2s are inseparable. In some cases, one of them is dominant to the other, so that the second is contributory. In some cases, they're perfectly balanced in importance. One amplifies the other. In some cases, they act completely together and make a loud noise. In each case, they are together because of the inner connection I felt, not primarily that I made them at the same time. So, in some cases, one of them is dominant, the other contributory. And I think the one on the right, in this case, that's in the collection, is the dominant one. And on the left, you see a fine photograph which puts that more monumental photograph in context. So reflect on, how differently maybe you see this single photograph in the pair as opposed to when you see it alone. In some cases, they're perfectly balanced in importance. One amplifies the other, and I think this is really a good case of that. The road, a metaphor, the road on the right, a metaphor, and then the family on their endless journey. The captions, by the way, which I won't dwell on here, but they're a combination of quotations from people she and her husband met, like this one, the highway to the west, they keep the road hot, a-goin' and a-comin'. They've got Roman in their head, US 54 in southern New Mexico. And then the homeless family from their field notes that they talked to, homeless family, tenant farmers in 1936, etc. Sometimes they quote from a sociologist like Rupert Vance. Sometimes they quote from newspapers that they found. And in the pairs, in some cases, they act completely together and make a loud noise. I think that's this one. So I have been studying pairing myself with my own photographs, and it's a very difficult process to put together pairs of photos. Things that you think intellectually might go together, just when you put them together, don't. So they have to act together in a compositionally. They should act together in terms of meaning also. And I take color photographs, so they have to work together in terms of color. And I decided to really try to understand pairing better by looking at American Exodus and studying Lang's pairs. And so from that, I derived 4 different types of pairs, which I use in my own work. One is probably the easiest pair to make, and that's a descriptive pair. I would call this a descriptive pair. The one on the right is the one in the collection, and the one on the left is putting that other photograph of these men with their hose into a larger context. And then there's the explanatory pair, where one photograph, where they explain each other, or sometimes one explains the other. And I would say that this is an example of the one on the left explaining a little bit about the one on the right, which is in the collection. Here you see it. Now, to my mind, I can see why Lang did it in the book, The American Exodus, but in my mind, the tractor actually detracts from the power of this image in this case. The narrative pair. So a pair that tells a story, not just an explanation, but that tells a story. And I think that this is an example of a narrative pair where you see the family on the road walking, and then you see this long journey ahead. And it's you can imagine their story. I think that this also, though, has some qualities of the next type of pair, which is the metaphorical pair, because you could say here that the road truly is a metaphor for the journey. And this is the metaphorical pair. The way that, the comparison of 2 dissimilar things. Here you have, to create larger meaning, the woman here, the broken windmill mirroring her stance and her jutted out elbow, and they're both against the sky, and then the caption, if you die, you're dead, that's all. So I'm not saying that one is better than the other, that it's better to be paired than to see photographs individually. I love this photograph. I love it. I always have, and I love this pair, both. Same with this one. I love this photograph, and I love this pair. It's not that one's better or not. They're different. So let's move on to the American Countrywoman. And it turns out that in the Greenberg and Steinhauser collection, there are portraits of 11 of the 15 women depicted in Dorothea Lang's American Countrywoman, which is, as I just alluded to, it's a series of portraits of women. And here's what she writes at the beginning of the book. These are women of the American soil. They are a hardy stock. They are of the roots of our country. They inhabit our plains, our prairies, our deserts, our mountains, our valleys, and our country towns. They are not our well-advertised women of beauty and fashion, nor are they a part of the well-advertised American style of living. These women represent a different mode of life. They are of themselves a very great American style. They live with courage and purpose, a part of our tradition. So these are the 11 of the 15 that are currently in the collection. Included at the back of the book is this quotation from a letter that Lang wrote to Beaumont and Nancy Newhall in 1958 when she sent them a series of pairs of photographs for their book on photography. She said, "I used to think in terms of single photographs, the bullseye technique, no more. I find that it has become instinctive, habitual, necessary to group photographs. A photographic statement is more what I now reach for. The twos are inseparable, like a sentence of two words." So here's Queen. The woman called Queen on a Sunday morning at church time. Note that she wears her do-up bonnet, typical sunbonnet in this part of rural America. Church time. So by now, the prose is stripped down, for the most part, in American Countrywoman. And this woman. Farm wife, lives on the Great Plains. Family farmstead, neighbors, exchange labor by an old custom. And note her walking right there in the middle. She's striding along in the midst of all these men who are working and whatever they're painting the house, scraping the house, whatever they're doing, all of this, a bundle of energy. I come back then and I see this photograph differently. And I see the shadow cast on the wall as like an expression of her built-up energy. In this case, she left the minimalism. She's a woman of the high plains. If you die, you're dead. That's all. But then a long quote by J. Russell Smith to put the context in. And there's our windmill. Drought years. Now, the interesting thing about this collection is that Greenberg and Steinhauser collected multiple prints of the same subject, which is quite interesting because we can see how Lang cropped them differently and how she printed them differently at different times. And so here's one, and here's the other, and here's the one in American Countrywoman, which is, it's in between these two. You know, in this one, you're really right in focused on the wrinkles, the face, the profile, the strength of this woman, and what she's seen. And here, it's pulled back a bit, not quite so intimate. I mean, you have the sense of the kind of clothes she's wearing, so it's you have more context. One is not better than the other. It's different. And of course, this one's kind of in between. Mary Ann Savage was a faithful Mormon all her life. She was a plural wife. She was a pioneer. She crossed the plains in 1856 with her family when she was 6 years old. Her mother pushed her little children across plain and desert in a handcart. A sister died along the way. My mother wrapped her in a blanket and put her to one side. The portrait of Mary Ann Savage was made in 1931. She died 5 years later. Many years later, in 1953, her gravestone was photographed as it stood in the village graveyard. Her son, at age 85, recalled, "She helped build this Mormon village in the wilderness." You see there at the bottom on the gravestone, member of Second Handcart Community, 1856. Like many others on the Great Plains from Scandinavia, she homesteaded where her son now farms. This is the family farmstead. ex-slave with a long memory. Woman of the Far West welcomes friends gathering on Memorial Day in the old cemetery. This is an annual occasion and great day for the country people. They bring their lunches and stay all day in the valley, visiting with old associates and cleaning up the family graves. Home place. The valley held generations in its palm. Now the interesting thing here is the palm is on this photograph, and the reference to the palm as a metaphor is alongside the house. But look at this. This was, she used the same photograph in her classic essay, Death of a Valley. And I'm just going to read so you can see the difference in the way that she's phrasing her words here. From peak to peak, from the Vaca Mountains to the Cedar Roughs, this was a valley 11 miles long, 2.5 miles wide, warm, sunny, and quiet. It was a place of settled homes and deep loam soil. It was a place of cattle and horses, of pears and grapes, alfalfa and grain. If I had ever known it had never known a crop failure. It contained the town of Monticello, a center with only one store, 2 gas pumps, a small hotel, and a roadside spot, the hub. And the valley held generations in its palm. So here she's using the words and the image together metaphorically. And how many of you, I don't know how recently you've read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, but this is the opening of her photo essay of 1960 with Perkle Jones called Death of a Valley. It's about the Berryessa Valley in California that was flooded to provide a reservoir for water. And so it progresses with, I think this is really her most eloquent photo essay and quite eloquent both in images and in words, but that sort of elegiac, this was a valley, and it was, before, and then Rachel Carson's book was published a couple years later. But it's very much the same sort of tenor there. And these are the photographs that follow in A Death of a Valley. And here's the cemetery that she refers to in the American Countrywoman caption. So, Lang, I want to, towards the end of her life, there were she was tape recorded talking to a number of people and reflecting on her life as she was putting together a retrospective at the Museum of Modern Art, talking about her photographs, about her intentions, and on the essence of the photograph, Lang observed, what is it in the end? It's a mounted piece of paper with a photographic silver image on it. But in it, there is an element which you can't call other than an act of love. That is the tremendous motivation behind it, and you give it. Not to a person, you give it to the world, to your world, an act of love. That's the deepest thing behind it. The audience, the recipient of it, gives that back. It strikes me that this is what Daniel Greenberg and Susan Steinhauser have done. They have seen and received that act of love embodied in Lang's photographs, and they have given it back. I sensed that when I met Daniel Greenberg yesterday. I sensed that the collecting of these photographs was an act of love. And the gift of this wonderful collection to the National Gallery, to the nation, to us, is an act of love. In the very sense that Lang described the essence of a photograph. Thank you, Daniel Greenberg and Susan Steinhauser.